In higher education, rubric is often used as a catch-all term. Any grid with rows and columns is handed to students under that name. Instructors frequently use these grids as scorecards for grading at the end of an assignment, rather than as cognitive maps meant to guide the actual learning process. Educational researcher Susan Brookhart investigated this trend. In 2018, she published a meta-analysis reviewing 46 higher education assessment studies to analyze the specific tools instructors were putting in front of their students. Brookhart's review suggests that many of these tools do not align with the technical definition of a rubric. When these tools are designed as simple point tallies, they tend to reward students for following directions rather than for making cognitive progress. The specific language used within the grading criteria determines whether a student focuses on compliance or on learning. Using Brookhart's data, we are going to separate true rubrics from mere rating scales. We will examine the specific structural issues in the assessment tools currently circulating in university classrooms. Precise terminology is the first step towards helping students monitor and regulate their own learning. Ask an average instructor to draw a rubric, and they will likely sketch a matrix, criteria on the left, point values across the top, and empty boxes in the middle. But the literature defines three distinct tools. The first is the checklist. A checklist measures dichotomous presence. It asks a binary question. Does the work contain this specific element? Yes or no? It is not built to measure quality. The second tool is the rating scale. This measures performance along an abstract continuum. An instructor assigns a numerical value corresponding to evaluatives like poor, fair, or excellent. While these tools are common, they do not meet the strict requirements of a true rubric. A true rubric requires two specific components. The first is explicit criteria, which define the qualities to look for in the work. The second is performance level descriptions, or PLDs. These descriptions must show how those criteria appear across a continuum of quality. They describe what the work actually looks like at each level. The difference between a real rubric and a rating scale comes down to the use of descriptive versus evaluative language. Evaluative language assigns a judgment without offering a direction. Telling a student their work is average does not explain how to make it excellent. A true rubric describes the actual characteristics of the work, while checklists and rating scales primarily assign a value after the work is done. We can see the impact of this distinction by comparing two assessment tools analyzed in the 2018 study. First, consider an oral communication scale from a 2010 study by Avanzino. For adequate delivery, the matrix describes the speaker's style and use of notes as average. This creates a problem for the learner. A student cannot use the word average to physically adjust their performance or improve their next speech. Contrast that with a thesis rubric from a 2016 study by Prince and colleagues. Under manuscript structure, the rubric specifies that all elements are logically connected and form a consistent and concise argumentation. This provides a specific blueprint. A student can use this description to monitor their own writing, checking their draft for logical connections and consistent arguments. Descriptive language provides the information needed to correct a draft. Evaluative language simply provides a grade. When Brookhart analyzed all 51 assessment tools across the collected studies, she found a consistent pattern in how these documents were written. 14% of the rubrics failed the language test, relying entirely on counting elements or using evaluative ratings. An additional 16% were actually numerical point schemes rather than qualitative rubrics. The primary theory behind rubrics is that they work by making expectations explicit to the learner while they are still working on the task. However, the data reveals a gap in how these tools are actually deployed. In 43% of the studies, the rubrics were used only by instructors for grading. The students never saw them. Keeping the criteria hidden prevents the rubric from performing its main job. Without the map, students cannot navigate the assignment on their own. A descriptive rubric is only useful for learning if it is shared with the student as a formative guide, rather than kept as a secret grading key. This data leads to a paradox within the student outcome results reported in Brookhart's study. All 13 efficacy studies in the review reported positive learning outcomes and increased motivation. These results were consistent, whether the rubric used precise descriptive language or flawed evaluative language. If many of these tools are technically flawed, why do they still result in better student work? Brookhart's synthesis provides the answer. The presence of appropriate criteria is the primary driver of success. There is a significant difference between a trivial criterion, like having 5 paragraphs, and a substantive one, like stating a compelling thesis. Substantive criteria force students to focus on the quality of their thinking, even if the grading scale used to measure it is imprecise. This leads to a clear directive. Define meaningful, substantive criteria before you build your grading matrix. Next, write performance levels that describe the work objectively, rather than judging it subjectively. Finally, share this document with the student before they start the assignment. When we shift from evaluating compliance to describing excellence, we turn a bureaucratic chore into a practical tool for student agency.